All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Dickey. I'm a CLI engineer at Heroku. If you don't know who Heroku is, we're essentially an app hosting platform. We make it easy to run apps without having to mess about with infrastructure. So you just push your app up to us, we run it, sort of like a modern version of GeoCities, but you can run a real business on it. We work particularly well with node apps. You basically just need to have your app be able to run with npm start, and it'll just install things in your dependencies and everything. We got a sponsor booth set up, so if you're interested to hear more, definitely come and hang out. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. So yeah, I particularly like CLIs. I've been working on CLI development for a long time, and before this, I was a backend developer. Typically on the back end, I'm sure as you guys all know, we use CLIs for everything. There really isn't a Unix GUI. There's IIS, which Windows had, but I don't think anybody even uses that anymore. CLI is just the way things are done on the back end. The front end, I think more recently, probably just in this last year, it seems like we've been seeing a resurgence of CLIs. I'm thinking of things like Bower, things like Create React App, Angular CLI, Vue CLI, stuff like that. People are finding it really useful to build CLIs instead of, alternative GUIs. CLIs are great because they can really allow the user to build up different things and create something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. So like on the web, if you want to use something, the developer would have had to specifically code the application to do exactly the thing you want to do. But with the CLI, you can pipe commands into different commands. You can create batch scripts and stuff, and there's a lot more flexibility there. In particular, I think that CLI apps are useful for internal tools. I know, like early on in my career, I did a lot of work in like Django apps where I had to build admin interfaces and things. This is work that was really only done by a group of people in the cubicle next to me. I spent a lot of time building web apps to do this, but it would have been a lot easier if I would have just taught them how to use a CLI. These weren't people that use CLIs, but it would have just taken a lot less time for me to teach them how to use a CLI than to build a whole web interface with the CSS and HTML and everything. It's also really good for prototyping functionality. Heroku, we did this early on. There was no GUI, there was no web interface. It was a lot easier and quicker for us to iterate on CLI's functionality than it was to build out all the stuff on the web. Nowadays, we support everything in both because we have the team to do it. But early on, when it was a small team, it was crucial that we were able to iterate so quickly. So in building the CLI, we a couple years ago, Salesforce wanted to use our like CLI core as well. Specifically, we have plugin functionality that lets people extend the CLI that they want to use. So they forked our code base, and we kind of dealt with having two different code bases and merging and everything. And earlier this year, we released a framework, so we didn't have to do that anymore. We have a CLI framework that anybody can use to build their own CLI apps, and we use it internally for the Salesforce and Heroku CLIs. In addition to that, Apollo, Netlify, and Appify are also using oclif as well, and people seem to like it. It's all written in TypeScript, though you don't have to write a CLI in TypeScript. You can use JavaScript if you want. We switched from Flow to TypeScript in January, and the team wasn't that sure about it, myself included, but now we've all converted completely. I almost can't even imagine writing JavaScript without TypeScript anymore. It's not just safer, but it's faster. The autocomplete and everything is it's a dream to work with. Like it's really won us over. So today I want to talk about a couple of things. I kind of want to go over my principles on designing good CLI applications in the 12-factor CLI app. Then I'll give a quick demo of oclif and show you guys how it works. So the 12-factor app, this is a concept that Heroku came up for web apps, and all Heroku apps generally have to follow all of this stuff. though this isn't limited to using Heroku apps. It's just principles that we think are good that all web services and applications should follow. And a good example of this is using environment variables instead of configuration files. So like if you have a JSON file of a configuration for your app, that's just one other thing that you have to provision out every time that you want to run the app. A lot of users just use environment variables. They work a lot better when you need to provision out a bunch of dev machines or staging boxes or whatever, whether or not using Heroku. Sort of in that spirit, I came up with 12 CLI factors. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go over 6. But my blog post is up at medium.com/jdxcode if you guys want to see the other 6. So factor number 1, now these aren't in any particular order, but this one is definitely the most important. Great help is really essential. It's important to have the help both inside the CLI, so you can use --help. That's a convention that all CLIs should follow. So you can get the help right there, and also in the web. The web's really important because people need to be able to Google for problems, and if people are trying to help each other out, they need something to link to. You can't give a hyperlink to in CLI documentation. You can't give a hyperlink to man pages. So having web documentation is really important. Oclif, of course, will generate this stuff for you. So you just have a flag, you give it a description. This comes for free. Yeah, and we're going to have man page support soon. Oh, shoot. Sorry about that. If I could turn on caffeine here. Problem solved. Yeah, we're going to have man page support just because it's pretty easy to add in like an extra place to dump information. But they don't work on Windows, so I'm not that interested in things that don't work on Windows because we have Windows users. With the help, it's really important to always show help when the user's asking for it. These are all the ways that I'm aware of that users might ask for help. Perhaps there's more, but these are the only ones I know about. -h, help, --help, and help on subcommands. And it's really important to always show the help. If it even looks like the user's trying to ask for help, then show it. In any CLI, they should just reserve -h and --help just for showing help, because you haven't been able to give the user the way that you want them to run the help. So you just you need to have it shown. Sort of what I'm getting at is sometimes CLIs will do fancy things like try to npm does this and I don't like it, or it will do spell correction. If you almost get a command right, it'll go and it'll run the thing that it thought you meant to run. That kind of stuff is really problematic because if let's say you could run Heroku app or Heroku apps, plural or non-plural. If we allowed that to just be standard behavior, you could run Heroku app and it would do the same thing. Then down the road, if we want to make a new command called Heroku app, it's going to break. So, for compatibility reasons, it's not good to be loose with CLIs. They should be very strict about the input that they accept. But help is the exception, where if the user wants help, give them help. Shell completion is really important. Notably, I don't use it myself, but I've definitely seen how other people use their terminal, and having solid autocomplete is really useful. There's a plugin for oclif that does this, and you can do things like autocomplete, flag values and stuff, and it's pretty cool. Factor number 2, prefer flags to args. Flag values are much better. They're really self-documenting. This is an example of a command that we used to have called a Heroku fork. We actually don't have it anymore, but it's still a good example. And this used to actually take a source and destination. So the idea is I want to copy one app into another one. So the destination was provided with an argument, and the source is provided with a flag. And that was really confusing. Nobody knew which was the one they had to do. So we changed it to --from --2, and it was much clearer. Anybody can look at that and tell you exactly where it's coming from, where it's going to. Factor number 3 is, what version am I on? Getting the version is really important to make sure the user's going to run that to check if things are up to date. Just out of habit, I always check. And whenever I'm using a new CLI tool or picking one up I haven't used in a while, just making sure I'm on the latest and I'm not on some ancient version that's going to cause me problems. And it's sort of like when the USB, like how you have to flip it over 3 times before it'll go in. It's like -V, -V, -- version. Just show the version in any of those cases. There's a hiccup here because -V sometimes means verbose mode. My article gets into like how to handle that correctly, but in general, -V should show the version, unless you're like running a command that shows verbose. Factor number 4 is mind the streams. So quick background on just how CLIs work. I'm sure not everybody knows this. Like CLIs have 2 output streams. One's called standard out, one's called standard error. And standard out and standard both go to the screen by default. So if you print to standard out, it shows up on the screen. If you print to standard error, it shows up on the screen. Where this comes into place is if you want to redirect the output. So take one of the output from one command, send it to a file. You could take the output from one command and send it to another command. In this case, we're running my app and sending the standard out to foo.text. If we wanted to show a warning, then we would need to put it on standard error. So it still shows up on the screen, doesn't end up in the file. Now this is really important, both so that the user sees the error, but also, if you're outputting, say, a JSON file, and you put the string in there, it's going to screw things up. So it's important to understand that if you're building a CLI app, and if you're doing any kind of sub-processes, always make sure that standard error gets elevated right up to the top. Another thing is, I've ran into this a lot where there's some tricky parts here. Like standard error is not for errors. There are actually times when you don't want to, when you use standard out for errors. In the case of like you're outputting it internally to like like an IDE or something, just like some JSON error, then it really should go on standard out because it's output that's going to somewhere else. Also, there are times when you want to use standard error for just general messaging and not stuff that's an error. A really good example of that is curl. So with curl, you can redirect output to a file, but they show the progress on standard error. That way it still shows up, but it's outputting the contents of the file. That progress is not an error. It's just extra information. So, sort of out of band stuff you put on standard error. Factor number 5, handle things going wrong. Things going wrong inside of a CLI is standard procedure. In the web, we can really prevent the user from doing things we don't want them to do by just designing the interface that way. Things like radio buttons and stuff. But in the CLI, we just can't predict what the user's going to type in. So errors are pretty common, and that's fine. But I think as a community, we could do a lot better with the error messages we give to our users. So these are the 5 things I think all errors should have. Their code. TypeScript does this really well. Like it'll give you like TS2423, and then you can just Google that, and without any extra context, all you're going to see is hits about that specific error. So that's really good. Have a title, optional description. Description could be really long. Like we have a specific error in the Heroku CLI called multiple git remotes in repository. And that's all it used to say, and that's meaningless. Now it's like 3 paragraphs of useful information, so users are like, oh, okay, I get what's wrong. And we've got comments that people really like that. So, show a verbose description if you can. And also tell them how to fix the problem. That can be really useful. And that could be something that's dependent on, the specific command or the specific error. And then finally, show an URL. It's good to give them a place to look for more information. This is actually taken from Postgres. They do the same thing with their errors. And I think it's a really good philosophy. Factor number 6, the last one we'll cover today, is be fancy. Things like colors and spinners and all these kind of things, they really make the CLI look good. In fact, when I added this spinner into the Heroku CLI, I've got more praise for that than anything we've worked on. It just makes it feel faster. As silly as it is, it works. Beyond this, progress bars are even better. And colors to sort of differentiate different text from one another is really useful. Obviously, don't go overboard. In fact, we've found through trial and error, there's only a few colors you can really reliably use. It's magenta, cyan, red, yellow, and don't use anything else, because it'll cause problems with Solarized or Windows or something. But that's enough it gets you pretty far with those. Dim is also okay, but it doesn't work in my terminal. So I don't know if it works for other people, but it doesn't break, it just isn't dimmed. Bold is good too, bold's a useful one. But yeah, progress bars are even better than this. It's a lot harder, and depending on what your API or what you're actually doing, it might not be possible to build a progress bar. But progress bars in the CLI, in the Heroku CLI, I would like to see a lot more of, but we don't have that many. Another one is that we've been doing more recently in the Heroku CLI is OS notifications. There's a great utility called OS Notifier that makes this trivial in cross-platform support for notifications. This is really good if you want to do something that takes like 5 or 10 minutes. The user's going to tab to a different screen. This just lets them know, oh, hey, it's still the thing you wanted is done. So like an example we're using in the Heroku CLI is PG wait when you're waiting for a database to be provisioned, or Heroku run with private spaces, which basically a task that you want to run that takes a long time to start up. Lastly, don't be fancy if the user doesn't want you to. These are really the only rules you have to follow. I think people are a bit too timid to try out fancy stuff. But really, if you just watch out for these 4 things, you're fine. If it's not a TTY, like the redirecting to a file, don't show the colors. If terminal equals dumb, that's an environment variable that like Emacs set to just say like, just act like I'm a stupid terminal. No colors as standard convention, -- no colors a flag that we passed in. Oclif does all this, Chalk does this, probably any language you use has standard tools will either do this or make it really easy to follow these things. And lastly, I have a quick demo of going through setting up an oclif app to show the stargazers of a GitHub repository. So oclif is a generator, so I'm going to generate a multi-command CLI here and just run through some default options. I'm going to use Mocha for testing and use TypeScript. Now it's generated the project. I'm going to run get the command list, get the help for the hello command, which just comes as a stub little command there. Run it with a flag. Now I'm going to install a tool called Axios. It's a HTTP client for Node, and the TypeScript type definitions for it. And now I'm going to generate a new command called stars. Go into that, and really quickly right now, just going to cruise through and create the implementation for this. So it's going to add an argument for the repository name, like oclif/oclif to get the stargazers. Set a description. It'll show up in the help. And then this will be the real implementation of the command. I iterate over each of the stargazers, log them to standard out. And then we can run it or get the help. And we see the argument and the description and everything. I'm going to run stars of the oclif repo, and there we have it. So that's it. That is building an oclif CLI. That's all I have. This is my contact information. I'm happy to take some questions.
When you're building CLIs like this, do you have any kind of principles to think about how to compose your functions? Like, you make a function that does A, B, and C, or you make 3 different steps that does A, and then B, and C.
Do you mean, so I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you asking like, how do you divide up the behavior of the CLI? Like, like to the user that's using the CLI. I don't know if I have any good general sort of comments on that. We ran into this recently where we actually had to split a command into 2 different ones, and that was problematic. So, I mean, definitely with CLI development, you want to make sure that you get it right on the first try. You know, like with the Heroku CLI, we haven't been able to change anything because, you know, users are really depending on things to work the way that it does, whether that's because they're using it in a script or just muscle memory. So, yeah, you want to get it right the first time. You know, Git has a concept of plumbing and porcelain, which I like the analogy of. I don't think Git is always a great example of a good CLI, but I think they got this one right. You know, sort of the model is like in a bathroom. There's porcelain, you know, the stuff you sit on, and then there's the plumbing, which is behind the scenes. And so, you know, the plumbing is there if you want the nuts and bolts to kind of piece things together. But really, you're supposed to use the porcelain for like day-to-day tasks. You know, I don't know if that's helpful. But. Oh, good question. Yeah, so oclif supports a bunch of different methods of packaging. So the way the Heroku CLI does this is we package Node right into the tarball, and we essentially hard link that. So, you know, that way, if you're using Node on your machine and you want to use Node 4, which we don't support, which a user might want to do, right? Like, think about Heroku. Like, a user could be updating an old app that only works at Node 4. That they have, you know, it's just some legacy thing they haven't touched in years. So, you know, whatever the node is on the path can't be the one that we use necessarily. So, you know, so we link to that, and that also allows us to auto update and update to new versions of Node. But there's a tool called Package, PKG, that goes one step beyond that, and it creates a single binary of a Node CLI. I definitely do not recommend using it because it's really useful to have the JavaScript files sitting there on disk. You know, you can add console.log statements. You know, and that's not just used for me; it's used for the users too. They can kind of figure out what's wrong or diagnose problems. Like, you know, one of the great things about using a scripting language is you can modify it, and that's incredibly useful. So, you know, I looked at package, tried it out. It works well for what it does, but I think at the end of the day, there's no real value in having a single binary. But also with oclif, you can just like have npm installed -g, you know, if you just want to target the latest LTS version. Yeah.
I always wondered, how do you implement that spinning icon in the terminal?
Oh, how do you do it?
Replacing a Unicode character?
Yeah. So like, basically what you do is you just output a character, and then you backspace, and then you output a character again, you backspace, you output a character again. That's how it works. Actually, if you've ever seen like CLIs that show like a big output, and they're refreshing, they're actually like drawing that out over and over. It's incredibly messy, but it gets the effect you want. But yeah, that's how it works. There's a tool called Aura, O-R-A, that was my basis of this. It's just like a standalone spinner library. We also have CLI UX for oclif, which is a set of a bunch of different things, including the spinner. I have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Does oclif support like deprecating certain, like either flags or commands, and I guess like how do you handle that if you want to?
Fun fact, just because I found this somewhat recently, this doesn't answer your question, but there's a util.deprecate in Node. If you haven't seen that, it's really great. It just allows you to like make a Node function deprecated, and it'll show one deprecation warning for it. But even if the function is called a bunch of times, it won't show it again. This doesn't help his problem because he's asking about how do you deprecate like a command. Oclif supports hidden commands, so you know there's a lot of hidden commands in the Heroku CLI of things we've deprecated, and that hides it from the help, hides it from the output, and that's a good first step. But beyond that, you know, just show a warning. You know, we have ux.warn, which just outputs a warning, and just let the user know that this thing's going away. And give a date. You know, like we usually do, like 6 to 9 months or something. We just pick a day and say this thing's gonna stop working, and that you know helps put some pressure on the user to change what they're doing. Maybe one more. Yeah.
How did you implement the auto completion feature?
So,
Standard library?
yeah, so it's one we made. It's called this is oclif autocomplete. We actually have a patent for that we're processing right now, open source patent. So like we're not gonna none of this is all open source code, of course. But yeah, it's pretty clever. It essentially is a way to create dynamic CLI autocomplete. So like the app example, what that's going to do is it's going to use the Heroku CLI to get the list of apps and then show them in the autocomplete. So there's a combination of like Bash and ZSH code that is able to do that and make that all work. So it's pretty cool. To my knowledge, there's no more complex autocomplete library. There's like 7 levels of generics code there, but I didn't write it either. But the guy that did is really good. All right. Well, thank you so much. That was fun.